Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and sustain in me a willing spirit. Now you know the story. King David spots an attractive woman taking an outdoor bath on the rooftop of her Middle Eastern home. Her name is Bathsheba, and she's married to Uriah the Hittite, a member of King David's army. Now this story is often told quite politely, sometimes even with a hint of illicit romance or unrequited love. But David goes on to sleep with Bathsheba. What is spoken of less often is that Bathsheba almost certainly had no choice in this matter. In fact, one of the translations when it tells the story says that David sent messengers to Bathsheba and they took her. So I suppose there might be a vague possibility that she was seduced by the handsome, powerful king and went willingly to his bed. But far, far more likely it is that by today's standards, and I think even by the standards of those days, she was quite simply raped by a powerful man. And to complicate things, to complicate this matter, Bathsheba ends up falling pregnant with David's child while her husband is away at war. So there's no easy way to explain this. So to try and tidy up the mess, David sends Bathsheba's husband to the front lines of the battle where his death is almost certain. And sure enough, Uriah is killed. However one wants to look at it with legal language, this is premeditated murder. So David now is both a murderer and an adulterer. And like all sinners, David at some level tries to hide. He tries to pretend as if nothing's happened. He tries to cover it up. Until God sends the prophet Nathan to confront David. Because even if no one else knows, when it comes to sin, we know that God knows. And for David, this confrontation is devastating. And truth will do that to us. It can bring us to our knees. And David is brought to his knees, and the consequence of being on his knees is this exquisite Psalm 51. And the thing we often miss here is that I think David could have ignored Nathan. He was the king. He could have had Nathan killed, I suppose. But for all his sinfulness and his terrible sinfulness, there seems to be in David a fundamental goodness. He is a man after God's own heart. Another man might have simply rejoiced in his conquests and dismissed it. But David is broken to the core. And we shouldn't underestimate this for ourselves. Maybe some of us are broken to the core over our sin. But maybe some of us are broken to the core because of this pandemic. Maybe some of us are living with broken relationships or abusive relationships which break us to the core. Or we're living with relentless pain or deep loneliness as a result of all that's going on. And we are broken to the core. I'm convinced that whoever hears this sermon today, that there will be a number of us who feel broken to the core. And so I want to say to you today, if you are one of those who feels broken, I want to offer you a simple prayer. It's just one line from David's psalm, from this prayer of David. But I think it's enough for now. This prayer is jam-packed with stuff, and this one sentence is rich with something for broken people to pray. Listen to it. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and sustain in me a willing spirit. Come, say it with me. Let's do it again. At home, say it. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and sustain in me a willing spirit. We need to ask ourselves in this brief moment together, what could that sentence mean? In the light of David's life, what might David have meant when he was praying those words? And I want to suggest just two things, if I can, today. Firstly, I'm convinced that at least a part of what David must have been praying for when he prayed for a joy to be restored is he must have been praying for restored relationships. Restored relationships. David's sin has undoubtedly broken all kinds of relationships, not only with God, but with his priest Nathan, with his family, and with the people he leads. And human relationships are at the center of what brings joy into human lives. It really is true. If you like, it's been studied, it's observed that the heart of what brings joy to humans is good relationships. And in the same way, broken relationships will therefore rob us of our joy. The Christian martyr Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, "There is hardly anything that can make you happier than to feel that you count for something with other people." In the long run, human relationships are the most important thing in life. So when David prays that God will restore the joy of his salvation, he is surely praying that part of that restoration will be the restoration of these relationships that his behavior has broken. And in these difficult days, in these physically distanced days and all that goes with it, I want to make a simple, both invitation and I suppose an appeal to you. Don't give up on your friendships and on your family. And be deliberate in nurturing good human relationships with others. It will be for you and for them a great source of joy. Even though we've been isolated, there may be opportunities to nurture new relationships. There might be old relationships which have dissipated. Don't give up on relationships. Work on building good human relationships. It's the greatest source of joy, and therefore when they are broken, it also can be the deepest cause of pain. So give it time. Make a deliberate effort to make it work. So when the sermon is over, phone a friend, affirm them, bless them, express your love for them. It will be a part of restoring your joy in difficult days. But then there's a second thing that I wanted us to look at today. It is that phrase about a willing spirit. David asks God to give him to sustain in him a willing spirit. I hear lots around today, lots of people talking in one form or another about we need to be positive. But I want to say that there's so much be positive nonsense out there today. Quite often when people say be positive, what they mean is, come, let's pretend that all of this is not real. Let's stick our heads in the sand and our fingers in our ears, and let's kind of wish it all away. Let's pretend that none of this actually happened or is going on anymore. And that's not what a willing spirit means. That can't be at all what David is praying for, that we just pretend that none of this happened. It turns out I went to do some investigating about what the phrase sustain in me a willing spirit actually means. And it turns out it's quite a difficult verse to translate. Different scholars have seen it quite differently. Some put the burden of that on God and some put the burden of it on David. But we can be sure that somewhere in the midst of that phrase, David is praying to the Lord and asking him to give him a spirit which is willing. Just 2 verses earlier, in verse 10 of Psalm 51, David has also prayed, create in me a clean heart, O God, and then put a new and right spirit within me. It's quite clear that after all David has been through with this Bathsheba story, that he is very concerned about the state of his spirit. And this psalm is overflowing with remorse and with regret. And a part of that for David is recognizing that some kind of change needs to happen in his life. He recognizes that he needs a new heart to replace the murderous and adulterous one he clearly has. But he also recognizes he needs not only a new heart, but he needs a new spirit. And not just a new spirit, but a right spirit. And not just a right spirit, but a willing spirit. And I do think that surviving these difficult days, as these difficult days take their toll on us in all these different ways, it requires from all of us, it's a prayer worth praying, Lord, give me a new Give me a right and give me a willing spirit. Pessimism is easy to come by, but it's a terribly destructive attitude. It blocks us off to hope. There is no hope for hope when we are pessimistic. It defeats us before we've even begun, before we got out of the starting blocks. Pessimism paralyzes us. It makes us literally inactive. We are unable to be of any good. And then in the light of what we're speaking about today, pessimism literally sucks the joy out of our lives. I love that story of the woman who was walking along the beach on a misty day, so she couldn't see so clearly. And in the distance, she saw a man with his hands stretched out towards the ocean, shouting, "Come, blessings, come." And again, he lifted up his arms and shouted, "Come, blessings, come." And just when she thought she'd stumbled upon this deep, intimate, spiritual moment in this man's life, coming bounding out of the water was this big, wet, furry dog called Blessings. I love this story because as people of faith, we are people who live inviting, welcoming, blessing into our life. When people talk about needing to be positive or have positive thoughts, what they really mostly mean is that we need to do the mental gymnastics of speaking ourselves into feeling better about things as they are. But for people of faith, optimism or positivity, and I think those are important things to have, optimism and positivity. For people of faith, these are a conviction that blessings are around us. Optimism and positivity is the conviction that God's blessing surrounds us all the time and that they are ready to be called out of the water. That even in the bleakest of circumstances, we are surrounded by blessing. Even in the bleakest of circumstances, we are surrounded by blessing. And I think that a part of what David is praying here is, Lord, let me see what I already have so that I don't long for what I don't have. Lord, let me see what I already have so that I don't end up longing for what I don't have. For people of faith, optimism is recognizing that even though things may not be as we wish they were, that there always is goodness to be found in God. In the midst of things that we cannot do, I hear people longing for things that they cherish. And just because of what I do, I hear people going, I wish we could just have coffee after church on a Sunday again. I wish we could sing heartily without our masks on. I wish I could just hug a friend. So even as we feel stuck and negative, pessimistic about what we cannot do, people of faith turn around and say, let's look for and find the things that even in the midst of what we cannot do, let's look for and find the things that in fact we can do. Even if it feels like it's less than what we cannot do, we look for what we can do. People of faith stand on the seashore with their arms outstretched and they shout, "Come, blessings, come." So won't you pray it with me once more this morning? Let's say it together. Lord, restore to me the joy of your salvation and sustain in me a willing spirit. May God bless you today, especially those who are broken to the core.